Hi, today I'm going to be breaking down the Heart of Orbis, how it works among other things, and rewards alongside its suggestions for what I would consider to be worth it when it comes to, well, this Heart of Orbis activity or quote-unquote function. Without further ado though, let's get into it. To start, we have to talk about how this thing works. First and foremost, there are 11 levels technically. However, in terms of clarity, it's a little bit weird because the 10th tier rewards unlock at level 11, whatever. In any case, there's 10, 11 levels, whatever you want to call it, and there's differing level of rewards at each of these, well, specific breakpoints. Now, before we even get into the rewards, however, you can level up or improve the level of your Heart of Orbis, or grow it in this case, using the tokens that you're seeing on screen right now. Now, as you can see right now, I don't personally have any. However, in terms of unlocking or gaining more of these relics, every single Monday you get 100 of these tokens and 100 on the first of every month, which means, if I'm not mistaken, you get roughly 500 tokens every month. Now, in addition to this, you can level up some of the rewards, of course, and you aren't just restricted to just getting B. You can fish and essentially gamba or roulette your way into getting something like an A rank, and of course the rewards that we saw later. Now, in addition to this, some of the levels are locked behind story stages that you have to clear, so keep this in mind in terms of what you have access to. However, the higher the level, of course, the better rewards that you get, and obviously the rewards here go from, or scale from B all the way up to triple S in the later stages of this activity. Now, in addition to this, in terms of rolling, every single time that you want to get a new specific reward from the Heart of Orbis, it actually only costs 10 of these purification stones to go from this, say, to something like these golden transmit stones. Now, in terms of the rewards, I'll break that down later. However, the storage system is something that we should touch on, as this is a 5 reward, quote unquote, temporary storage that you can hold rewards and items in. And of course, if you don't like something that you've held, you can always discard it if you get anything at any time. Now, in terms of a strategy and in terms of a quick look into a decent strategy when it comes to this activity, it is of course better, based on what I've described, to wait until the end of the month before claiming the rewards so that there's more chances to roll for the best possible option. However, you should know that if for whatever reason you decide to accept the rewards currently, all the EXP that you otherwise would have received from, let's say, claiming on the last week will be given to you, so don't quote unquote be afraid of missing don't be afraid of missing out on EXP if that's something that's a concern to you. Now, in terms of early rewards, there are a couple things that you can look into or that you can consider to be pretty decent. That includes things like the 50 leaves, which is ridiculous value. That also includes things like the 20 Molagoras. Now, in terms of whether or not you consider these or the rest of these rewards to be worth it or not, you can obviously consider things like the greater modification gems or the conversion gem chests. Geez, apologies. These could obviously roll pretty well, and especially when you're early on in the game, these can be, of course, beneficial and very helpful early on. However, those are more RNG than, of course, things like the Molagora. Now, in addition to this, as you continue to level up through the activities, you do not only gain access to the A ranks. Of course, at level 2, you get the S with gear, but once you hit level 3, you'll obviously gain new pieces of gear, things that are sometimes semi-rolled, things like the 4 to 5 star Moonlight Summon ticket, and the thing that you're probably or have seen people talk about, which is the fully completed plus 15 gear with rolls that look pretty ridiculous, if I'm being just transparent. Now, in terms of this, before we even break down the rewards or too many or go a bit deeper into the rewards, you should know that the Moonlight 5-star summon ticket obviously is pretty fantastic. Things like the Bottle of Knowledge and the Unknown Slate are also really valuable too. However, things like the 4 to 5 star Moonlight summon ticket will vary in terms of value, and you could argue the same for virtually any rewards in these lists where you have a gamba or a chance to get something like a 4 or a 5 star as opposed to just the 5 stars. Now, especially early on, it should be worth mentioning mentioning, or it is worth mentioning, that a lot of these early rewards, like the charms, are also very valuable in a game that, well, fixates or focuses entirely on upgrading your gear. However, there is something that is worth addressing regarding the rewards specifically, and that's in terms of what is quote unquote worth it or not worth it. Now, I did just kind of describe how valuable or how absurd some of these rewards are. I mean, you're seeing this right now. This is a guaranteed 23 speed, perfectly, or quote unquote, perfectly rolled speed set, speed sword. And alongside this, you have other things like over 50% rolls on a specific piece of gear. Now, if you get these things, these are absolutely fantastic, obviously. However, this isn't a very easy thing to obtain. And although we don't know the exact rates at which you can receive some of these items, let's go through a couple of the things that are maybe worth it or not worth it. Now, in terms of rewards that you may want to avoid, most of the rewards in the B tier are just not worth it, as if you just move up a tier, you can obviously see that instead of getting greater equipment charms, well, you get epic equipment charms. Not necessarily saying that the epic equipment charms are also really fantastic or of great value, but in terms of just one for one, essentially everything in the B tier is just worth skipping. Now, in addition to this, despite them being in the A tier, the golden transmit stones are also kind of bait, of course, unless if you're trying to perhaps buy story boss imprints or imprints for characters like Zeo, Bellion, the specific ML 5 stars that are also, or that also double as story bosses. However, even for this, and even at the top end of rewards, 30 golden transmit stones, as opposed to even something like one of these unupgraded 88 pieces of gear, is just bait. This is simply not worth it. Now, it is also worth talking about another reward in the S rank category, and that's these 5-star Covenant summon tickets, which in theory, maybe if they were selectable or if they were selectors, could be a little bit higher in terms of value. However, these are completely random. Now, that means that you can just get someone like Fire Ken, you can just get someone like, I don't know, you could list off any useless or less popular or less viable character that you can think of. And this is also doubled with the 5-star artifact summon ticket. Now, again, you could get something fantastic. Maybe you get something like a Holy Sack or an Elbrus if that's up your alley. Or you could get, I don't know, Samsara prayer beads, which even post buff are probably not as good as something just like Victoria's Flag. In any case, in addition to this, the 4 to 5-star summon ticket, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of criminal to be in this double S tier because, well, as you guys would probably imagine, we are unsure specifically about the rates of the 4 or 5-star probabilities here, but you can imagine that if this is anything like the Galaxy summons, you're getting a 4-star. In any case, this being in the same tier as, again, even some of these pieces of gear, a 15 sword, a 15 helmet, a 15 chest, 36 HP boots, or even 15 on either of these necks or sword or, you know, rings, any of these pieces is criminal, to be honest, just because of how much better value any of these pieces likely are for your account, even if you're a slower player. However, just standing next to it as well are the Bottle of Knowledge and Unknown Slate, which I would argue are still pretty good value, unless for some reason you get really lucky on the Moonlight Summon ticket. Now, that said, I did compare, of course, a lot of the pieces here, or I did compare things within the categories to each other. And while things like the +9 pieces of gear could be worth it, you do need a disclaimer for these pieces, as these, of course, are RNG, and there is just a chance that you get, let's say, on this 15 or on this +9 sword, instead of, you know, getting to 23 or higher on this sword specifically, there is a chance that you just roll low or very poorly on something like crit chance and crit damage, which ends you or could end you with something like 93 or 94 equipment score, which would obviously feel terrible. That said, that doesn't necessarily diminish or lower the value of these pieces. These are obviously just gambling specific rewards. Now, something that we do need to talk about regarding the rewards when it comes to the Heart of Orbis, and something that I touched on in general, is that there is no guarantee in terms of how many or what you are specifically going to get from this Heart of Orbis. And given that you are specifically only given a limited amount every single month, as again, you are limited to roughly 500 or roughly 50 pulls per month, that means that your total or your capability or your ability to roll something amazing is pretty limited. As a result, in terms of what you can expect, especially early on, getting something like the Mologoras or the leaves are definitely going to be pretty valuable. If you are in the later or the further, or you're further along in the Heart of Orbis section, you could of course argue that some of these 88 pieces are fantastic, especially if you are able to guarantee one of the accessories, as a lot of these accessories are of course pretty valuable even at base. However, it is worth reminding that if you are someone that has recently done the activities that I guess have come with the Origin activity or the Origin update with the Orbis guide, we have received a lot of rewards specifically, including these 85 pieces of gear, which have honestly rolled pretty fantastically for my account, but also have similar starting bases, as you could see here. Now, for this piece specifically, this is the one that, again, they gave us that had HP. And though this is not the most incredible looking piece of gear, if you decide to re-roll or reforge a piece like this, it is still 80 or it is still 95. Now, all this to say basically that if you are going to roll for gear, it is of course a complete gamble. And while you could argue in theory that you could re-roll or improve these pieces in the future, it is definitely fair to say that in terms of usability, you may want to hold off on some of these pieces, especially something like the helmet, as there is a chance that you just roll something ridiculous like 30 effectiveness with just these stat lines on them, or with just 9 HP, 9 defense, and 5 speed on it, which is usable but not amazing. In addition to this, personally, as of the writing of this video, in terms of usable characters or in terms of usable cast currently, you could also argue that a piece like the boots, if it ends up rolling entirely into defense percent, could feel pretty bad, as there aren't many characters currently that want speed and defense, and likely in most cases you would prefer to be a destruction character if you're looking for defense alongside defensive main stats like HP, crit chance, and crit damage altogether. But as a result, in terms of my recommendations, if you are able to get any of the S rank pieces and you are a new player, that is a totally fine commitment in my opinion. However, it is equally as fine to, if you receive them, land on or continue with something like the leaves or the Mologoras instead, as these will progress your account quite well. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about in terms of the Heart of Orbis is that these end tier rewards, again, though they look very enticing, and again, something like 46% crit damage on a ring is absolutely fantastic, the likelihood of you receiving any of these pieces are very low, probably the same rate as though you would have actually gotten one of these pieces, to be honest. As a result, if you are someone that is able to roll for something like the double S's for whatever reason, or if it comes out that the rates are low and you're even able to get something like one of the pieces of gear from the S ranks, that's totally fine. Though ultimately, regardless of where you are in the game, I cannot stress this enough, just getting 20 Mologoras and 50 leaves is pretty value. In case you're curious about just how valuable that could be, if you take a look at some of the additional packs, actually, from the Succession newsstand, which is pretty valuable at the moment, if you take a look at this $100 pack, one of the things that they include specifically with it is 40 leaves. Now, of course, this is also alongside something like the Mystic Medals, and of course, there are also the regulars coupons here. But even if you wanted to rationale roughly how much value this is, one of those 50 leaves, you could argue in some cases, is at least worth anywhere between $30 to maybe $50 if you want to put it simply. In any case, though, guys, that's going to be it for the Heart of Orbis. Again, in terms of the value for the Heart of Orbis, well, it's free, so you should be doing this whenever you can. However, just keep in mind that, again, in order to even unlock, or for certain stages, in order to grow your Heart of Orbis, you do need to complete this, these requirements, or fulfill these requirements here. However, in terms of your rewards, you can see what's valuable. Again, I don't recommend this being here, despite this being in my storage. Just for clarity, I just wanted to show you what it looks like in the storage. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. Hope you guys had a better idea as to how the Heart of Orbis works, what you should do specifically for the Heart of Orbis, and what you can consider maybe less worthwhile or maybe scamish kind of rewards. But as always, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.